signing on the air. This is the new Z100.
New York City was an impossibly saturated media market.
That was the dream. Hear your song coming out of the radio.
And it was really like this communal experience.
Live from the Penthouse Studio, Z100.
Scott Shannon, I will tell you right now, right off the top, it truly is an honor to, I know we've spoken on the phone, but to see you now in person. You know, a funny story, Scott, back if you remember the Bobby Poe conventions of years ago.
Yeah.
And I was just this lowly music director from Jackson, Mississippi that nobody would talk to. And you walked across the room and I was just in awe. I said, there goes Scott Shannon. And today we get to talk, my friend.
Well, I got to tell you something. There was no one else to talk to. You were the only person I could find.
I love it. And of course, we've got Mitchell Stuart, the director of this amazing film, this documentary about Z100, Worst to First, the true story of Z100. Mitchell, great to meet you as well.
Great to meet you, Dave. Thanks for having us both on your show.
All right, Scott, I want to go to the very beginning, and we're going to talk at length about the doc here in a few, which I absolutely love. But a question that I have for you right off the top, tell me where it all began for you, your love for broadcasting, when you knew this was your calling, that you were going to be going into broadcasting.
Well, I first fell in love with music. I mean, I loved rock and roll music. When I first discovered, it was like, I don't know, I was like 10, 11, in that zone right in there. And I think the first thing I heard about was Elvis. And then everything else came after that. And I just was crazy about music. It was as if I was backstage in an auditorium and all of a sudden the curtains opened up and there was the whole world in front of me. Music was so important to me. I was a jock. I played football and I played basketball and I played baseball. None of them to a really high level, but I certainly enjoyed it. And I made the baseball team in high school and the football team. But when music came along, I kind of lost interest. I still did it, but it wasn't my lifeblood. And then one of my neighbors told me about one of our favorite radio stations downtown where I live, where you could actually come and watch the DJs work, where they played these same records that I bought in my collection. I said, wait a minute, because the music came first, and then you went to the radio to hear the latest music. Then you went to the record store to buy, I only bought 245s a week because that's all I could afford from my paper route. And then I found out, as I said, you could go down to the station and stand out front and watch the DJ work. I said, holy crap, that's me right there. I'm 13, 14 years old, and I see this guy with headphones on, and he's got a microphone, and he's flipping through the 45s. And I thought, and I had a funny feeling when he answered that phone, there were girls on the other end, calling in to request their favorite song and tell the DJ, oh, I think you're so wonderful. Oh, Johnny Dark, you're great, and all that kind of stuff. I said, well, I think that's what I think I want to do. And that's how it got started. Then I put together a little radio station in my basement because my father was kind of a disciplinarian. He was a master sergeant in the Army. And that's all. I actually built a little room out of his foot lockers because he would be transferred out and we'd have to move. And he had these old foot lockers. And I made a wall. And then I brought the silver tone record player that we had downstairs. And I got a little microphone that I borrowed from a drive-in movie place. And I hooked it up, and I had a little top 10 songs and had my little radio station going, like a lot of people do that started, in radio that way. So that's how I got started.
Like I told you, I used to play in the living room. My mother would be cooking dinner, and my brother was my contest winner. And I played like I was on KRBE, my local station that eventually I worked for. That was my dream as a child. I love hearing that. Mitchell, tell me what drew you to this particular story. It's fascinating. 75 days from worst to first in the radio ratings. Tell me when you first, that's
74.
74. I'll take a day off.
Changes.
Mitchell, tell me about when you met Scott. Tell me about what drew you to the story, what fascinates you about this particular subject.
I am drawn as a filmmaker to individual stories and inspirational stories. There's enough negativity out there, right? And though it's a big story about this giant radio station, Z100, it's actually a small story of one guy and a group of people that did something that'll never happen again. So as a filmmaker, how could you ever turn that down? And as a New Yorker, with Z100 in our backyard, so to speak, it was a quintessential New York story, quintessential David or Davida versus Goliath story. And then I met Scott, and we're both kind of the same kind of people. We're hard. We don't take no for an answer, so I was drawn to that because it's like, there is no such thing as an obstacle. It's just a temporary bump in the road. So, he's a force of nature, and I had to tell that story. Like, it's music. I mean, that's all of our other religion, basically, right?
And radio. And I've told you about my love for radio, but as a jock, I don't know how many times I've been around other DJs and we've, mimicked the line, from the top of the Empire State Building. I watch your film. It wasn't even at the top of the Empire State Building. Scott, you were in Secaucus, New Jersey.
Don't tell people that. They think we're at the top of the Empire State Building.
Were you nervous, Scott, the first day that you signed on in New York?
It was really weird, Dave. Half of me was really nervous. I felt I had to go to the bathroom one time after another. You know how you get nervous like that. But the other side of me was very confident and cocky. And there wasn't much middle ground where I tried to get into that middle ground, but I couldn't. I was either scared to death or I'm going to kick everybody's ass. And that's how it was. And what I would do to get myself back from this side to that side is I would turn the radio on and listen to the stations that were already on the air in New York. And I said, well, I can do better than that. That's how I felt. I had to, if you don't believe in yourself, you're screwed anyway.
Mitchell, the testimonials that the interviews that we have, that we get to see in this particular film, you've got John Bon Jovi, who I absolutely love. And Scott, I shared a story with you yesterday on the phone about John Bon Jovi. Love him. But you've got Joan Jett. You've got Nile Rodgers. I mean, you've got huge names. And when you spoke with them, what was the feeling that you got, like the natural reaction, the excitement as they reflected? Again, going back to the days of Z100, if you wanted to be a big star, you had to get your record on Z100 New York. And these people genuinely were excited. What was the impression you got as they reflected?
Okay, the most accurate answer I could give you, because I could paint a before and after, I had worked and interviewed John Bon Jovi several times prior to that, right? And meeting him that day without a guitar, without a performance, I met the guy, and you hear on the film what was like the first time you heard your song on the radio, and you got the sense of there's an innocence. If you see his facial expression, he is so connected to the stories and how he felt about Z100, how he felt about music, how he felt about Scott. And he particularly that day, I saw the change in him. I felt like I was meeting John the person. Joan Jett, who I had never met before, Debbie Gibson, Taylor Dane, they all had the same feeling of they all wanted to be in the film. You got to remember, some of it was shot during COVID also. So people were going way out of their way to try to be a part of this. So it was capturing not necessarily the prime of their career. That wasn't what the look back, but it was going to a time that never will be again, and they wanted to acknowledge that place in history. And the another great indicator is Jim Kerr. Okay, documentarians, you want to get the other side of the story, right? And Scott had a lot of opponents when he was in the ring, right? We couldn't go to Imus because it wouldn't have been fair because he's not with us, right? But the one guy we could go to, was the 20-year-old heartthrob, Jim Kerr. So, okay, Jim, get before our cameras and we're going to talk. And I could not get him to from his point of view, he was in awe of what Scott did. Scott ran, burnt him with a flamethrower. So even he was kind of paying homage. So, documentaries make themselves and give their own tone. So it turned into not so much like a love fest, but that's what the story was. People were recognizing that time, whether they were the opponent and the victims of Scott and his merciless attacks, or part of it. And it was really enervating to me and interesting because everyone was a part of this, and it'll never happen again.
But you make it sound like I had a flamethrower and I was really knocking people down and blowing them up.
Well,
it was just a radio kind of joke. That's all. We were kidding around. Some of those people didn't think that at the time.
That was like one of the first, if not the first, shock jock. And so when he came here, you were. I mean, it wasn't called the shock jock, but Scott was amazing in the way he felt New York. New York is like, if you want to win in New York, you bring your A game, and then you're welcome. So and people acknowledge that in the film.
Dave,
Scott,
the one thing about New York radio is there's America and the world, and then there's New York. Everyone in New York thinks it's a special place, and only they can make it big there, but they're already there. They've already done it. So they don't pay any attention to the rest of the country. They don't. They just don't care. And that's why we were able to launch a sneak attack, because they had no clue who I was or what I had accomplished in the past. Or, we had the #1 ranked morning show in America down in little old Tampa Bay, Florida. And they didn't know that. They didn't pay any attention to anything going on outside of New York. So I could stroll right in and do whatever I wanted and say whatever I wanted. And when it first hit, when we first went to #1, they said, "Oh, it's a fluke." And then they said, "Well, this will fade fast." Well, they're taking advantage of being new in the market. When it first started, the newspaper reporters would say, "They're too new. They don't sound like New York. He better go back to Tampa Bay. He's terrible." And in the meantime, all we had was listeners. That's the only people who liked us. The critics hated us. Other stations thought it was juvenile and stupid. So, it worked out okay.
I have to ask about a story in the film. No spoilers, but I have to ask the story about Madonna. And anybody, Mitchell, if you want to jump in. Scott, apparently Madonna was really wanted to get her song on Z100. And you talk about it in the film where she would call the station regularly. I think she showed up. Scott, what can you share about that memory of her?
We think she showed up once. There's a division on that. But I do know that Madonna had her sights set on being a star. And at that time in history, Z100 was the place you went to be a star. If you wanted to be a star in the nightclubs, you'd go to WKTU, which was a disco station, very popular, and she could get played on that station, but that wasn't mainstream America. It might have been at that time, but it wasn't top 40 pop music, and that's what she wanted. She knew that Z100 was a trailblazer, and whenever we added a record, other stations in the country, it almost like it was a red light goes green light. When we put it on, it was okay to play anywhere. And she knew that. So basically, she would not harass us, but it was borderline. And finally, we said, if we put your new record on at night, would that be okay with you? Oh, yeah. Well, you kind of back down the campaign with all your friends. And she said, yeah. And she said, I'll never forget what you're doing, and I'll make it up to you after I'm a star. That's basically, the short end of the story.
Scott, I have one final question for you. And then Mitchell, I want to get, you can close it out, but I want to ask you, Scott, the most famous person that you've ever met and or interviewed that had the biggest impact on you.
Well, there's no doubt about the most famous person I've ever interviewed. That would be Paul McCartney. To me, he is a superstar. And I was lucky enough to interview him, George, and Ringo. I never got to interview John, sad to say. As far as somebody who impacted me, I can't really answer that question. I really kind of grew up on my own and got into the business and I was very shy. So I didn't really have a mentor in the business. I just I would vicariously study other people and then mix them all together and come up with me.
And you did a great job, my friend.
So
Mitchell,
far it's working.
Mitchell, what are you most proud about this particular film now that it's out?
Oddly, well, I think it captures the time, but the interview with Nile Rodgers, and for a couple of reasons. One, it was during COVID. It was one of the ones we literally did on Zoom. Couldn't even have a crew in there, which we did often in other places around the country. But one of the most decisive songs I remember from that period is Let's Dance. And Nile talked about, and we were talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan playing guitar, and we were talking about Nile playing guitar, and all these, cacophony of different music styles being in of all places on one record. And people don't remember, Bowie didn't have a lot of hits. He was doing art stuff before that, and Nile Rodgers produced it. And it didn't make it into the film because we really were careful about moving it quickly. But it's going to be additional bonus material. He talks about that record, this mix of everything, being the ultimate Z100 record because it had all styles. It was as diverse as you can be musically and with artists. And he said, when that became a Z100 song, all artists want to go crossover because that just means more people are seeing their art. And that's something I will take with me forever because it was just so meaningful. And it's easy to pick a big moment like, oh, Clive David, those are all important moments, but emotionally and as an artist myself, that was so riveting.
He and I checked out of the Corinthia Hotel in London about 2-3 years ago. I was covering a film and I was checking out and I looked over, there's Nile. I'm like, son of a, you're freaking, dude. So we had a
You're Nile Rodgers. Do you know that? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. He's great. Guys, I can't thank you enough for your time today. Scott, this is just a bonus and this is just me. And I don't want this to be the end of our new friendship. I really like you both. Scott, you have made my month just talking with you about Craddock yesterday. I honestly, let's stay in touch. I think you're amazing, and don't be a stranger is what I'm saying to both of you guys. I genuinely,
I got that same dog sitting right across from me.
He does.
Well, both of these are nods to radio, that and that. And I get so many artists. I had Tyrese who was on RCA. He goes, hey, that's the RCA Nipper Dog. I said, yeah, I got it when I was the music director at Kiss Dallas. But here's the cool thing. The last trip that I took my mom on before the pandemic and the world went nuts, I took her to Graceland. And if you take the tour inside, Elvis has this and I looked at it, I was like, wait a minute, I've got one of those.
He was copying you. Thank you.
Scott, seriously,
Nice
thank you for your friendship and thank you for your time. Truly an honor. Thanks,
See
guys.
you soon.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you so
You
much.
will. You will, Scott.
I'm waiting for you.